Faith can lift a person. It can also crush her when the wrong hands hold it. My name is Margaret Hayes. I kept a truth buried for 60 years. I live in a quiet place now, outside Ridgeview, Montana. I grow tomatoes and keep old letters in a wooden box. People see a calm grandma. That is the surface. Under that surface is a day that split my life in two. A day inside Pinecrest Fellowship under warm lights and polished pews. A day I stood up while the whole town watched and I spoke. Why did I speak? Because silence had turned into a cage. Because a man we called pastor had turned prayer into power. Because a 17-year-old girl named Sharon was shrinking under a shame that was never hers. If you are listening from any corner of the world, leave a small sign that you were here. A dot, a heart. Your country. Some truths need witnesses, even if they shake what you believe about good people, and holy rooms, and what love should look like. This is not a pretty story. But it is clean. I will not use ugly words. I will name what must be named. I will tell you how my life broke, and how somehow I built a better one with those broken pieces. Stay with me through the quiet start. Through the warning signs I missed. Through the night I locked the door with shaking hands. Through the church where I gave birth on the floor. Through the years when anger almost took me, and the years when purpose finally held me. And at the end, I will tell you what I would tell my younger self, if I could place my hands on her shoulders and meet her eyes. Let's begin. When I married Thomas Hayes, I thought life would be a straight road. Thomas was steady. He worked early shifts outside town. I kept house in a little rental with a white fence that needed painting. We joined Pinecrest Fellowship because everyone did. Sundays smelled like coffee and waxed floors. We sang out of old hymnals. I felt safe. The 3rd year of our marriage, I learned I was pregnant. At church, Pastor Caleb Whitmore announced it from the pulpit, smiling wide. "The Lord has blessed Thomas and Margaret," he said. People clapped. Thomas cried. I pressed my hands over my belly and felt joy like a warm light. Pastor Caleb began to visit our home more often. At first, it seemed kind. He brought Bible lessons for expectant mothers, little pamphlets with smiling drawings. He prayed with me, one hand on the booklet, one hand hovering over my stomach. He said, "I'm here because God cares about mothers." Then the pattern changed in small ways that are easy to miss if you want to trust. He arrived in the afternoons when Thomas was at work. He spoke softer than before, as if he and I shared a secret understanding. He told stories of chosen women who walked a deeper path, a path men could not always grasp with their carnal minds. He used scripture in ways I had never heard. I told myself, he is our pastor. He must know more than I do. He asked questions about my marriage. At first, simple. Was I resting? Was Thomas gentle? Did I feel loved? Then the questions got too specific. He wanted details about our private life. He said he needed to guide me biblically. I answered with the trust I had been taught to give. But something in my stomach tensed. One afternoon, he brought a marital counseling book. He sat close on our sofa to read it aloud. His voice slowed. His breathing changed. I got up to pour water. As I turned, his hand brushed my waist. It was quick, but on purpose. I felt shock run through me like a wire. I returned with the water. He kept reading as if nothing had happened. But the room felt different, as if the air knew a line had been crossed, even if words had not named it. After that, I tried not to be alone with him. When he visited, I stepped outside to hang laundry. I invited my neighbor Mrs. Clark for tea at odd hours. Pastor noticed. His eyes hardened. On Sundays, his sermons shifted. He preached about rebellious wives who spread suspicion, about women who let pride open the door to the enemy. People nodded. I sat still and stared at the hymn numbers on the wall and pressed my fingernails into my palm. I told Thomas I felt uneasy with Pastor's visits. Thomas frowned. "Margaret," he said, "you're tired. Don't let foolish thoughts in. Pastor Caleb is a holy man. Don't shame us with rumors." I went quiet. That is what a lot of women do first. We go quiet to keep the peace we are told is holy. I folded baby clothes we got from a church shower. I placed them in a drawer that stuck and always needed a little extra push. Still, signs kept appearing like footprints in wet dirt. Pastor had favorites among the women. Young wives, new mothers. He praised them from the pulpit for humble service. He invited them to special meetings at the parsonage. Older women, the ones who spoke their minds, were not invited. I wondered if I was imagining it. I prayed to be fair. I asked God to clean my eyes and my heart. But the unease stayed, like a splinter you can't dig out, small but always there. The day the splinter became a wound, it was late afternoon. The house smelled like bread. The sun came in a straight line across the rug. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," I called, and Pastor walked in without waiting. He held a small bottle of oil between two fingers. "I've brought a special prayer for the baby," he said. Something cold moved through me, but I kept my face calm. I had been trained to be agreeable. I learned that day what it means when a man in power uses holy words to cover unholy acts. And I learned what it costs a woman to push back. Before I tell you what happened on my sofa, I need to tell you about the pattern. Because when people ask, "Why didn't you run?" I say, because a pattern teaches you to doubt yourself before you doubt him. At Pinecrest, Pastor Caleb was friendly, quick to laugh, and always busy serving. He visited the sick. He moved chairs after potlucks. He prayed long prayers that made people cry. But he also kept a circle of young women close. Linda, Patricia, Sharon, who got extra attention. He praised their purity, then sent them home with late evening assignments. He said he was training them for deeper ministry. Older women like Mrs. Francis, who had founded a prayer circle years before, were ignored. If they spoke up, Pastor joked from the pulpit about old hens clucking. People laughed. A joke can be a knife with a smile. I started to ask gentle questions in the kitchen line, always with my voice soft so no one would feel accused. "Do you feel at peace after Pastor's visits?" I asked Linda once. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the sanctuary door. "Sometimes he asks things that are very personal," she whispered. "He says it's for spiritual guidance." Her face went red. Patricia said Pastor offered special counseling for her marriage, but when she arrived, he met her alone. He spoke about submission in a way that made her stomach twist. She left confused, feeling like she had failed a test she didn't sign up to take. I noticed the way Pastor touched shoulders during prayer. His hand lingered too long. He drew women aside with a serious face and a finger to his lips, the sign we all use to mean quiet. And the husbands? Most smiled and shook his hand hard. They said, We are blessed to have a man of God here." When I told Thomas that something felt wrong, he stiffened. "I won't hear it," he said. "Do not bring curses on our house." In those days, a man's reputation weighed more than a woman's truth, and a pastor's reputation weighed more than both. The more distant I grew, the sharper pastor's sermons became. He spoke about wives who opened doors to demons with suspicion. He hammered on obedience. He said, "Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft." People nodded. That scripture is in the Bible. It is true in its place. But in his mouth it became a rope. I watched Sharon, just a girl with a long brown braid, sit small in the back row. She looked like she was trying to disappear into the wood. Pastor glanced her way often. I did not know why. Not yet. The day of the oil, the house was too quiet. The clock ticked. I said, "We can pray here in the chair." He smiled, kind on the outside. "Lie down," he said. "It's better for the baby if you relax." His voice was honey. His eyes were stone. I will not describe what his hands did. I will tell you it was wrong. I will tell you I froze. Then I pushed his arm away and sat up fast like a spring. "Stop," I said. My voice surprised me. It was stronger than I felt. He stepped back, face sharp, the mask gone for a flash. Then a new mask came on, cold and threatening. "Who will believe you?" he said softly. "You're pregnant. Your mind is troubled. If you spread lies, you will make life here very hard for yourself. And for Thomas." He smoothed his hair, capped the oil bottle, and spoke in his warm pastor voice again. "I will pray that you find peace," he said. Then he left, as if he had not just broken something sacred. The house felt dirty. I locked the door with both hands shaking. I washed my hands. I washed the table. I washed the air with tears. That night, I did not sleep. I walked a path from window to door, hand on my belly, whispering to my baby, "I will keep you safe." The floor creaked like footsteps and I jumped. Fear makes a house feel haunted by the living. In the morning, I knew I had to tell Thomas. I hoped marriage meant protection. I hoped love meant belief. I was wrong. But the wrong answer taught me my next step. When Thomas came home 2 days later from the ranch job, I told him everything. I kept my voice steady. I wanted him to hear facts. I said what Pastor did and what he said after. Thomas listened. His jaw clenched. His eyes went hard in a way I had not seen before. "You are sick with jealousy and dark thoughts," he said. "You need deliverance. Pastor will pray for you. I won't have you slandering him." "I'm not slandering," I said. "I was there." "You are not yourself," he said. "You are pregnant. Your mind is not clear." We argued until my stomach tightened. A deep pain seized me and shot through my back. Thomas stared, scared now. He rushed me to the hospital. The nurse said the word contractions and told me to rest. 2 days, I lay there listening to beeping and whispers in the hall. I watched the ceiling tile patterns. I prayed for my baby. I prayed to not be crazy. And I understood something. Even if no one believed me, the truth stayed true. It did not vanish because mouths denied it. When I came home, a basket of fruit sat on our step with a card. "We're praying for your mind. Pinecrest Fellowship." I felt a hot flush rise in my neck. Pastor had turned me into a story to teach from. He came by that evening with flowers. Thomas let him in. Pastor hugged Thomas. He looked at me with sad eyes, one shade warmer than pity. "Sometimes pregnancy disturbs a woman's thoughts," he said kindly for Thomas to hear. "No hard feelings. We will pray peace back into this home." I saw then what confidence looks like on a man who has learned he is untouchable. It is a relaxed jaw, a slight smile, the ease of someone who has done this before and expects to do it again. At church, Pastor preached about Jezebel and spirit of accusation. Women stopped speaking to me. Men avoided my eyes. They did not want trouble. I felt like a leaking boat in a cold river. Hold on, I told myself. Hold on to something true. Linda caught me by the clothesline one afternoon. She looked around, then spoke fast. "He did it to me too," she whispered. "He said it was God's way to help my marriage. But afterward I felt wrong." Tears filled her eyes. "If I tell my husband, he'll say I seduced him." Days later, Patricia came to my back steps. "He called me for special counseling," she said. "He asked for details about our bedroom. He said only he could correct impurity." I felt trapped and dirty and grateful at the same time. That's the trick, isn't it? He uses God to keep us quiet. I took their hands. We sat on the steps like girls with scraped knees, trying to decide whether to show anyone the blood. Then Sharon found me behind the church, near the shrubs where smokers hid after service. She was only 17. Her braid was shorter now, as if she had cut off a piece of herself. She whispered so low I had to lean in. "I'm pregnant," she said. "He told me to say it was a boy from town." Her shoulders shook. "He said if I told the truth, my family would throw me out." I felt something rise in me like a clean fire. It was not hate. It was not rage. It was a bright refusal. This is the point, I think, when fear bends into courage. It bends when your pain touches someone smaller than you. "I will speak," I told Sharon. "I will say his name out loud. If no one stands with me, I will still speak. But I think you won't be alone." We counted the days until the next big service, when visitors would fill the pews and the whole town would hear. We did not sleep much that week. Courage is a heavy coat. It keeps you warm, but you feel the weight. The Saturday we chose was a Thanksgiving day at Pinecrest. People brought pies and stories of blessing. Pastor stood tall, his voice strong, his hands open. He preached on purity and obedience. He looked at me twice with a careful smile that said, "Sit still, Margaret." When he opened the floor for testimonies, my heart shook my bones, but my legs stood. I felt my belly heavy and ready. I walked to the front. Pastor shifted sideways as if to step in front of me, but he could not stop me without showing his hand too early. "Brothers and sisters," I said. My voice came out small at first, then found its shape. "I have a truth to speak. It will not be easy to hear." Pastor lifted his palm. "Sister Margaret is confused," he said. "Her emotions are high." I raised my voice. "This man," I said, "used his place to do harm. In my home, in other homes. He says God told him to cross lines God never told him to cross." A silence fell that felt like a drop from a cliff. Thomas stood up. "Sit down, Margaret," he shouted. "You will not shame our home." I steadied my hands on the pulpit. "I will not sit," I said. "Not while girls are carrying shame that is not theirs." The room tilted. For a second, I thought I would faint. Then I saw Sharon at the back, head down, shoulders tight. She stood. Her face was wet, but her voice was clear. "It's true," she said. He is the father of my baby. Gasps and shouts broke open. Someone cried. A child whimpered. Linda stood next. Then Patricia. Then others I had not expected. Women I had only seen in passing, each with a story that matched the pattern. Pastor climbed back onto the step. "This is a demonic attack," he said loudly. Hysteria. Jealous women trying to tear down God's work. Then Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, 72, with a cane and eyes like winter sky, rose. The room hushed. "Caleb," she said, calling him by his name, not his title. "We saw your eyes wander. We saw your hands stray. We kept quiet, thinking God would correct you. Our silence was sin." Those words cracked the dam. Men started yelling. Some moved toward me. Thomas walked fast with hate on his face I had never seen. I thought he might strike me there in front of everyone. Then women moved too. Mrs. Eleanor, Mrs. Margaret, another Margaret older, Mrs. Dorothy, and they formed a small wall around me, a circle of bodies with hands spread. "Back," Mrs. Eleanor said, her cane planted like a stake. "You lost the right to touch her when you chose your pride over her safety." Pastor declared an exorcism was needed at once, that he would lead it. That is when my body decided to speak in a different way. A pain pulled me in half. A warm rush ran down my legs and onto the wooden floor. "My water," I said weakly. Then the next wave came, as if the truth itself was being born. Chaos turned into a strange order. The men stepped back, confused. The women took over. Mrs. Eleanor snapped commands like a field nurse. "Boil water," she told one. "Towels," she told another. "You," she pointed at Thomas. "Wait outside." He opened his mouth. She lifted her cane, and something in her face convinced him to stop. We made a space on the floor between the first pews. Hymnals were pushed aside. Someone laid down coats. Someone held my hand and counted. I breathed like the nurse showed me at the hospital. The church smelled like wood and fear and women's courage. Between contractions, I thought of the strangeness, giving birth in the very place that had turned against me. But it also felt right, like the truth had decided to come in full view, so none could say later that it had not happened. "Push," Mrs. Eleanor said. I pushed. In the pauses, I prayed. Not fancy prayers, just, "Help me, God." Hours later, or minutes. Time bends during birth. A baby's cry rose up into the rafters. It was the cleanest sound I had ever heard. A boy, purple and furious at living. They wrapped him in a shawl that smelled of mothballs and lavender. I held him to my chest. He grabbed my finger with surprising strength. I felt a deep quiet settle in me, the quiet that comes after long fear. Not peace yet, but quiet. I kissed his head. A name formed on my tongue. Daniel, meaning God is my judge. I whispered it into his ear. When I looked up, Pastor Caleb was gone. Someone said they saw him slip out a side door during the chaos. Like most cowards, he left the mess for others to clean. They took me home later, not to my own house. The door was locked, but to Mrs. Eleanor's small place with creaky floors and lace curtains. She made a bed on her sofa. She warmed soup. She watched the baby so I could sleep an hour here, an hour there. The next morning, there was a note on my door from Thomas. "You have shamed our home. Take your child and go. This house is no longer yours." I stood on the step and held my baby tighter. The winter air stung my skin. I read the words twice, then folded the paper small and put it in my pocket. It is still in my wooden box. I did not cry there. I walked back to Mrs. Eleanor's, and I cried in her kitchen while the kettle rattled on the stove. She put her hand on my back and said, "You were brave, girl. Now we do the next thing." The next thing was survival. I had nowhere to go, no money of my own, no steady family nearby. I stayed with Mrs. Eleanor while the town split into two camps. Some believed the women. They had seen too much to ignore. Others called us envious troublemakers. They said we wanted attention. They said we were destroying the faith of good people. Some of the very women who had stood up at church began to retract their words under pressure at home. Please do not judge them too fast. A woman with 3 children and a husband who controls the paycheck will sometimes choose silence to keep food on the table. Fear can press the truth back into a person's throat. Sharon had the hardest time. Her family put her out to protect their name. She slept behind the hardware store one night. When I heard, I begged Mrs. Eleanor to take her in too. For a while, we were 3 women in one small house, one old, one young, and one in the middle, sharing food, worry, and a thin quilt on cold nights. Help came quietly. The bakery lady, Mrs. Peterson, sent yesterday's bread in a paper sack with no name. Mrs. Miller, who sewed dresses, accidentally made extras. But the help always came with a whispered, "Please don't say it was me." That is how shame works in a town. It makes kindness hide. I needed work. Mrs. Eleanor spoke to Mrs. Davis, a widow with a small farm. She needed hands for her vegetable garden. "It's hard work, low pay," she said. I took it. Every morning, I strapped Daniel to my chest and walked 3 miles to the farm. I planted, weeded, watered. The sun burned my neck. Dirt got under my nails and did not come out, but my mind got clearer in the rows. Plants respond to the truth. If you water them, they grow. If you ignore them, they die. I liked that kind of honesty. Mrs. Davis was practical and kind. "I don't care about church talk," she said. "I care if you show up and tell the truth." She taught me to time the water just right so tomatoes split less. She let me suggest crop rotation to rest the soil. Soon she trusted me with the garden plan. At night, I counted coins on the table and felt proud in a way I had not felt as a wife in a tidy house. Money I had earned with my hands felt different. It felt like a spine. Sharon's baby girl came in late spring. We named her Hope. Sharon looked at that baby and shook with a mixed feeling only some mothers understand. Love tangled with pain. "How do I love her and not think of him?" she asked me. "You love her bigger," I said. "And when the thoughts come, you say them out loud in this kitchen, not in your chest." We made a small family with no last name and no man at the head. People whispered. We did not break. We learned simple tricks to make money stretch. Stretch soup with oats, mend socks with careful thread, trade eggs for sugar, save coffee grounds for the garden. Every small success was a stitch pulling my life back together. I tried once more to talk to Thomas. He had rented a room behind the workshop. He met me by the alley. His eyes were tired. His jaw was still hard. "You could have kept quiet," he said. "You could have saved our name." "Our name is not holy if it sits on top of a lie," I said. He turned away. "Pride is a heavy stone. Some men would rather hug it than set it down. I walked home under a sky so wide it made my chest hurt. I held Daniel and looked at the outline of Mrs. Eleanor's roof. "We will build something," I told him. "I don't know what it will look like yet, but we will build." As Daniel grew, so did my circle. Not a formal group. No one would have dared to make an organization. Just women with the same kind of bruise inside. Some visible, some not. Mrs. Rose taught me to make caramels to sell on Saturdays. Mrs. Baker showed me how to mend shirts so well the stitch hid itself. Mrs. Gable traded eggs for help, mending a fence. I watched patterns in other churches, too. A deacon's wife from across town came by one afternoon, hands wrapped tight around a teacup. "My husband says I must do certain purifying rituals," she said, eyes on the table. "It feels wrong, but he says God told him." I listened and told her she was not crazy. Sometimes that is the first medicine a woman needs. Word spread that my kitchen was a place where women could say things without the room shifting under them. Mrs. Adams came from a town over. A Catholic woman wrote me a letter about a priest who had called his visits communion. A Pentecostal woman told me about a total dedication rite her pastor demanded. The language changed. The harm looked the same. I did not become a bitter person. Some think that must happen. But anger burned away into something cleaner, a will to tell the truth without spitting. I learned to say sentences like, "What you describe is not God. It is a man using God's name," and "You are not to blame for someone else's choice." Thomas returned once when Daniel turned 10. He stood at the edge of my small piece of land, thinner now, eyes unsteady. He asked to see the boy. I let them sit on the porch while I shelled peas. Thomas promised big things he could not give. Daniel listened and nodded, polite as I had taught him. Later that night, he said, "Mom, when I am a husband, I won't act like that." That was one of my brightest victories. I did not pray long, fancy prayers anymore. I prayed short ones while hanging laundry. "Help her," I'd say, thinking of a woman who had told me something hard. "Guide me," I'd say, heading to the market with candies wrapped in wax paper. "Hold me," I'd whisper at night when old memories knocked loud. When people ask how I healed, I say, by working, by naming things, by listening, by letting grief come and go like a tide, and by finding women who would sit at a table for hours and tell the truth without flinching. Years passed, and my spine grew straight again. Mrs. Davis told me she planned to sell part of her farm and move closer to her grown children. "I'll sell you the back parcel if you want it," she said. "You can pay in small bites." I trust you. The idea scared me. A woman alone owning land in our town? People would talk. Also, what if I failed? What if the well went dry? What if a storm took the roof? I lay awake and listened to Daniel breathe in his sleep. I heard Mrs. Eleanor move down the hall to the kitchen for tea. I imagined a small house that was ours, with nails hammered by my hands and paint chipped by our years. I got up and wrote yes on a scrap of paper. The first night in my own little house, the floor sagged a little in the hallway. The kitchen window stuck. The back fence leaned like it was tired. I loved it at once. We sanded shelves. We painted walls. We planted a garden with beans that climbed like they had someplace to go. Sharon and baby Hope stayed with us until Sharon met Walter, a quiet widower who saw her whole story and did not flinch. He married her and adopted Hope. I cried happy tears at that wedding, small, simple, in a yard with lemonade in jars. Time passed like wind in wheat. Not fast, not slow. Daniel grew long arms and a good mind. He helped me in the rows and asked questions that were too big for his age. I told him the truth in pieces that fit in his hands. Letters started to arrive. Some from nearby, some from towns I had never heard of. Women wrote about pastors and priests and leaders with smooth words and crooked hearts. They wrote about confusion and shame and waking up in the night with anger burning like a fever. I wrote back as often as I could. Sometimes I could only write, "I believe you." Sometimes I could write more, a suggestion, a phone number, a way to plan an exit. I kept the letters in my wooden box. When the box filled up, I got another. People say, "Why did you keep them?" Because they were proof that my pain was part of something bigger, and my healing could be too. Mrs. Walker moved to our area around then. She had been part of a church 2 towns over. One afternoon at my table, she said, "We had a pastor like your Caleb. We told the regional leaders he was a problem. They moved him quietly and called it mercy. He did it again in the next town. Something in me went cold and hot at once. It was worse than I thought. It was not one man's sin. It was a system that protected his place and polished his name while women's names turned to whispers. That was the day I decided to write my story. I did not think of it as a book yet. I thought of it as a long letter to the women whose letters lay in my box. If I write it down, I told Daniel, I might help more than one person at a time. He smiled. "I'll carry wood for the fire while you write," he said. And he did. I wrote at the kitchen table after chores, pencil first, erasers worn to nubs, then a borrowed typewriter. I wrote the beginning that was all soft edges. I wrote the day of the oil. I wrote the pulpit and the birth and the note on the door. I wrote about silent transfers and jokes used as knives, and how a woman's reputation weighs less than a man's pride in some circles that call themselves holy. Some pages came out clean. Some came out shaky. Some I had to throw away because anger made my sentences too sharp. I learned a new skill, telling the truth without letting rage be the narrator. I looked for a publisher. Most said no. One said, "We avoid religious controversy." Another said, "Remove the parts about structures and keep the personal story." I would not. Mrs. Walker knew a small women-run press in a city 3 hours away. The editor, Helen, came to my kitchen and drank coffee that tasted like the garden in August. She read my pages with her finger sliding under the lines as if she were praying. Then she looked up and said, "This matters." We edited. We shifted chapters so the church scene fell right where a reader could not look away. Helen asked me to add a section with resources, phone numbers, ideas for safe exits, notes for friends who want to support without making it worse. I liked that. I wanted my story to be a tool, not just a tale. The book came out with a simple cover, a pew, a shadow, a small hand on a hymn book. We called it The Secret They Kept from the Faithful. Letters multiplied. Some were thank yous and me too. Some were furious. A church leader wrote that I was sowing division. A thoughtful man wrote that the book made him see why his wife had left their church and that he owed her an apology. A woman in her 70s wrote, "I am forgiven at last." I began to get invitations to speak. The idea made my stomach turn. Daniel, by then grown and steady, said, "Mom, you already did the hardest part. Now you just move your mouth where your pencil moved." I laughed, then packed a bag. My first talk was at a state college. My hands trembled at the podium. Then faces looked up at me. Young women, a few young men, and I felt the old courage coat lay on my shoulders again. I told them how religious language can be used as a net and how to cut it with questions. Where is this written? Who benefits? Who is silenced? I spoke about the pattern. I said these words slowly. Your body is not a church's property. Your soul is not a man's to manage. Afterward, a young woman cried into my shoulder. A young man thanked me for giving him language to understand his mother's pain. I drove home on back roads and cried alone in the car, relief and grief sharing the seat. I worked with Dr. Clark, a psychologist who studied what she called religious trauma. She said my plain words helped professionals hear what their clients struggled to say. We made a short course for counselors and social workers. How to listen for spiritual manipulation. How to treat shame that wears a Bible verse like a mask. How to rebuild trust in God without rebuilding trust in harmful systems. Some churches changed. Not all. Some doubled down, calling me a liar or a bitter old woman. Those statements looked ugly next to the letters from women who found the strength to leave a predator or to stay and name one, whatever safety allowed. When Sharon wrote me after reading the book, her words were a warm blanket. "Hope is a mother now," she said. She raises her girls to speak up. Your voice helped save us. I put that letter in the wooden box and cried again, the kind of cry that doesn't sting. Years after Pinecrest broke, word came that Caleb Whitmore had died alone in a small Texas town. He never held a pulpit again after Ridgeview. He sold things door to door for a while. He faded. When I heard, I felt relief first. Then a complicated quiet. I did not cheer. I did not mourn. I sat with the fact that a man had used a holy office to harm and had died without, as far as anyone knew, telling the truth about it. Daniel said something that surprised me. "Mom, the system made him bigger than he was," he said. That doesn't excuse him. But if the system had checks, trained women leaders, real reporting, consequences, maybe he would have been stopped before he became who he became. I agreed. That's where my mind had been going for years. If you fix only the man and not the machine that kept him running, the next man steps in like a replacement part. We pushed for small changes where we could. Background checks, clear rules for counseling, doors open, never alone, documented, training about power and consent, independent review boards that include women who won't be talked over. In some places it took. In others, people said, "We trust our leaders," as if trust means you never verify. People ask, "Did you forgive him?" I say this. I released him from my hands to God's. I let go of the hook that kept my heart attached to his choices. That is what forgiveness means to me. It does not mean forgetting or welcoming back or calling evil good. It means I stopped drinking poison and calling it devotion. The most important part was this. I kept my faith. Not in a building, not in a man. In God who does not need a stage to be God. I met him in fields and kitchens and in letters written by shaking hands. I met him in women's laughter when a plan worked and someone got to safety. I met him in my granddaughter's clear eyes. If you have lost your faith because a man wore it like a costume while he did harm, hear me. Faith itself is not that man. You can walk away from the costume and still keep what is holy. I am an old woman now. My hands are brown with sun and work. I live on the same small parcel we bought in fear and hope decades ago. Daniel comes by with his wife. He checks the fence posts. He fixes the latch. He brings me soup when winter rushes early. My granddaughters run in the rows, chasing each other between the tomatoes and the beans. They ask questions I never would have dared to ask at their age. Grandma, why didn't you live with Grandpa Thomas? Why do some people look at us strange at the market? Why do you keep so many letters in boxes? I tell them the truth in words that fit their years. I say, some men used God's name to control women. I said, no, it cost me. It gave me back myself. You must always ask questions, even of people who speak in holy voices. Especially then, they nod. They take this in like they take in my recipes. A pinch of salt, a cup of courage, a rule about not being alone with a leader in a closed room. I feel the line of women behind me, my mother, Mrs. Eleanor Sharon, and I feel the line of girls ahead of me. We are all holding the same rope, pulling the same direction. The farm turned into a quiet refuge over the years. No sign on the road, no flyers. Just a known place where a woman can come for a night when she needs a bed that is not near a raised voice. Sometimes she leaves before dawn, shoulders lighter. Sometimes she stays for a week and learns to make caramels to sell. Sometimes she sits at my table and says what she has never said, and we put the words in the air so they are not in her chest anymore. I keep the first note Thomas pinned to our door in the same box as Sharon's letter about Hope becoming a mother. I keep Mrs. Eleanor's obituary there too. She died at 87 with peace on her face. Respectable or just? She asked me once, late in her life. I choose just. I had it carved small on her stone. Awards came here and there. A state office took my picture. A university sent a certificate in a frame. I smiled and put them on a shelf and went back to the garden. Paper does not feed a woman who needs soup. A fence mended does. A handheld does. A sentence believed does. When the girls help me weed, I teach them plant names and people truths. This is lamb's ear, I say. Soft, but it grows where it wants. You can be soft and still go where you need. They laugh and roll their eyes. Later I catch them repeating it to each other like a joke that is also a rule. Sometimes the past walks back in through memory's door. An old song on the radio. The shape of a man's hand in a crowd. A pulpit in a photo. When that happens, I sit down and breathe like I did between contractions, slow and counted. I say, "You're safe now." It is not weakness to be careful with old wounds. It is wisdom. People still ask, if you could speak to your younger self right before all of it, what would you say? I would take her face in my hands and say this: "Sweet girl, if a holy man needs secrecy to guide you, he is not holy. If he asks you to hide things from your husband, from your mother, from your own good sense, he is building a trap. If your body tightens when he enters a room, trust your body. God made that alarm. If your husband calls your truth a curse, he is afraid. Let his fear be his, not yours. If you stand up and your legs shake, stand anyway. Women will move. Some will move toward you and make a circle. Others will move away to save themselves. Don't harden. Keep your palms open. You will lose a house and find a home. You will lose a name and find yourself. You will lose false peace and gain the kind that does not depend on anyone else's smile. I would also tell her this. The story does not end with a man's exit or a town's opinion. It goes on in kitchens and gardens, in letters and small rooms where women tell each other the truth. It goes on in girls who ask questions with their heads high. It goes on in you learning to love God without borrowing someone else's voice. If you are listening now and your heart is beating faster because you recognize something here, I am placing a key in your hand. The key is not to my house. It is to your voice. Use it when you can. Use it safely. Use it with help. Your voice may unlock someone else's cage too. And if you are a good man listening, and there are many, hear me. Your job is not to defend a building or a title. Your job is to protect the people in your care. Believe the women you love. Ask questions you are scared to ask. If your pastor is holy, he will welcome accountability. If he is not, your questions will make him show his face, and that is a mercy to all. I am Margaret Hayes of Ridgeview, Montana. I am old and strong. I raise tomatoes and granddaughters. I answer letters in a hand that shakes a little, but I still write straight. If this story put a light in your chest, or a clean anger, leave a sign that you were here. A comment, a city, a small, I believe you. Then share it with someone who needs courage for their own hard day. I have one more batch of caramels to wrap before night. The girls will be here in the morning to help at the market. We will laugh. We will sell out by noon. We will come home to the shade and the sound of the gate closing softly behind us. If this story met you where you are, subscribe for more true stories told with care. Share in the comments where you're listening from, and if you're able, a short message for someone who needs courage today. If you have a story and want it told safely, write to us. You are not alone.